All right, I'll call the meeting to order. I will begin by acknowledging we are in Treaty 1 territory in a traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Neil Hart and I'm chairing today's panel. With me is Jeff Heitch to my left and Ben McIntyre to my far left. The assessor today is Jason Brown and the recording secretary is Kara Belshaw. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment role in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements of the applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. We advise that comparisons of assessments of property do not consider evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it in the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard and the board will deliberate and privately make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Can you do the swearing in?
Please state your name. Jason Brown. Do you affirm the evidence you present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And swear. Please state your name.
Trevor Smith.
Do you swear the evidence you present today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first property on today's agenda is 101 Dawson Road North. So you can begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subject's located at 101 Dawson Road North. Roll number is 0605155500, defending a 2020 assessed value of $628,000. This is an industrial property consisting of 3 buildings, built between 1939 and 1978. Wall heights ranging from 10 to 18 feet. Land is zoned M3 manufacturing heavy. Land area is 87,054 square feet, and we're using a leasable area of 11,904 square feet. I'll note the land to plan ratio is 8.58 to 1, which is on the high side, but there is no excess land on this property. Turning to page 2, there's an aerial photograph of the subject property. So starting on the left-hand side, this is the office building. Has a floor plan of 2,472 square feet. There is a basement in there, but we're only assessing 1,752 square feet of the basement. It has 10-foot ceilings and was built in 1955. The next building to the right was built in 1968, is 1,680 square feet and has 18-foot wall heights. And the largest building to the right of that is 6,000 square feet, built in 1978 and has 16-foot wall heights. There are several detached structures that aren't added to value. Most notably, there's 3 trailers. They're like office trailers. They've been there between 15 and 20 years. 2 of them are even joined together. You can see up by the office, but we are not adding value for those. I have some comparables on page 3. These are all in the area of the subject property, ranging from 6,000 square feet up to 15,000 square feet. Wall heights ranging from 12 to 24 feet. Effective year built ranging from 1958 to 1988. And the rents range from $6.40 to $7.94 a square foot. On page 4, we have our income workup. You can see the leasable area at 11,904 square feet. We're using a model rent of $4.25 a square foot. We've reduced that by 5% for vacancy, 2% for expenses, and a shortfall of $3.75. Capitalize that at 7.15, which yields the final value at 628. I'll just note that 2018 was 532, the assessment, 532,000. That was using an NOI of 42,555 with an 8 cap. And the 2020 is 44,869. If you used an 8 cap on that, it would be 560, 863, so 561 rounded. I'll note that the model value for 2020, the land model value for this property was 690,000, but we're not relying on that today. Page 6, we have our cap rates. The second grouping of properties is the industrial groupings. City uses a range from 5.5 to 9.8, 9.8 being the highest, with the 20th percentile being at 6.34 and the 80th percentile being at 7.8. We're at 7.15, so nearing the 80th percentile. Some photographs starting on page 10. So this is located in the Mission Industrial Park. Once again, aerial photographs on bottom of page 10 and page 11. And then we have some exterior shots of the office on page 12. This is owner occupied on page 13, the income and expense, so there's no rents to be extracted from that. And based on that, we ask that the assessment be confirmed at 628,000. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Smith?
Yes, I do. Given workload at the assessment department, you probably haven't had a chance to inspect either this property or the other ones on the
I
docket.
have not. I do drive by it most mornings. Worked in the area for a number of years, so I'm familiar with the area and the property, but I have not been inside.
Okay, so it hasn't been inspected then?
Not by me. It has been inspected, but not by me.
And during that inspection, did they have any notes with regard to the basement space in the front building?
I didn't see any.
Okay. Just looking at, we're not in disagreement on net rental rate at 4.25 for the subject property, but just looking at page 3, would it be fair to say that these are significantly superior properties to the subject?
That would be fair.
Okay. The capitalization rate that's used of 7.15%. Do you know how many, say, heavy industrial capitalization rates would be included in the model by the city when they do their analysis?
I do not.
Would it be fair to say it'd be on the low side?
I have no knowledge of that.
Okay. And the 7.15, so when I look at the 20th to 80th percentile, it's roughly midpoint there at 7.15 that's being used. Original age of the first structure on the site, 1939, and we have, pardon me, then we have our second building in 68. Would that not seem to be on the low side for properties of that vintage?
It's a model generated cap rate. It was put to 8% last cycle. At 8% this cycle would be 561 rounded.
Okay. All right. I do have one rebuttal document, so I'm not sure how you wish to deal with that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let's just have the panel ask questions of the assessor first, and then you can get into rebuttal. So, is there any questions you have?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yep, thank you. Your page 3,
Yep.
rent comparables, all those properties are M3.
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. But rent is not being disputed today, so, and we're a lot lower than these, so.
Yes, but I also note that you indicated that you would agree that these are all far superior properties to the subject property.
Off the top of my head, I would agree with that.
And so in trying to identify other comparables, you weren't able to find comparables that were consistent with the property?
This is a strange property. It's a lot of smaller buildings built on a larger site, so it was a little bit difficult to find comparables for that.
Satisfy my curiosity, thank you.
Okay. Brent?
Just one question. Did you notice on page 13 the discrepancy in the leasable area reported versus what the assessment department is showing?
Yeah, they're not counting their basement space. We are using 1,752 square feet of basement space.
And do you know what it's used for?
I believe they do use it for storage. I looked at the field forms for this property and they had storage written on it, so.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Okay, and I've got no questions, so now you can get into your rebuttal evidence.
No, it's different.
Thank you.
Wait till you've all got it there. Everybody's got the document there? Okay. So if we flip to page number 7 of the city's evidence there, at the very last chart is their chart of industrial capitalization rates in the relevant time period. The first property there, 90 Park Lane, is what this document is dealing with. So the property was owned by Pure Industrial REIT, an national scale industrial real estate income trust. This was one of the properties that they owned in the city, and if you look through the document here, I've got some highlights on the second last page, I guess. And it indicates that the trust will announce the disposition of 90 Park Lane, 20,000+ square foot single tenant asset in Manitoba. The trust was able to relocate the existing tenant from this asset to another trust-owned asset. Timing of the sale of this asset was tied to the relocation, thus removing any downtime to the trust. The asset was unencumbered at the time of sale and was not classified as an asset held for sale. So essentially what they're saying there is that the tenant had left and moved into another one of their properties at the time of sale. So categorically, you can't have a capitalization rate if the property is not bought on an income basis. There is no revenue on which the property was purchased. There's no net income. And indeed, the property was purchased by a client of mine, West End Radiators. They're located at 2008 Logan. They have a numbered company through which they bought the property, but it's the Felius brothers that owned West End Radiator and their real estate holding company. And they bought it for use by their own company. So there's no cap rate to be developed out of this because there is no revenue to be developed. So that first capitalization rate cannot be considered as an accurate representation. And then I didn't discuss it, maybe I'll discuss it in the second one. 1100 Waverly is a different animal entirely. Happy to answer questions on that.
Any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions on that one?
No questions.
Okay, you kind of answered my question. I was wondering if the new owner had a client ready to move in, but it was going to be owner occupied. All right, I guess then you can proceed with your presentation.
Okay, great. So we have a couple of points of differentiation here. I'll just flip to my page 14 to summarize those. One of them being the leasable area, obviously. Then we have the amount of expenses to be assigned, which is always a point of contention this cycle, and then capitalization rate. All the rest of the factors we are in agreement on. So just dealing with the leasable area to start with. If you look at my page number 1, actually we'll just start with the chart at the top of page number 1, gives you a bit of background on it. So the property was appealed in 2018, and they did reduce the property from $608,000 to $532,000 based on a capitalization rate of 8% that we had for the property. We have appealed this decision to the municipal board, and we're awaiting scheduling on it. So that's not an end result at $532,000. Property is zoned M3, heavy manufacturing, and indeed that is what it is used for. 3 ages of buildings, 1939, 1968, and 1978. And if you look at the bottom of my page, we run through these quickly. The original stucco-clad building that fronts on Dawson kind of looks like a bungalow. It has a main floor area of 2,472 square feet. This is the office building for the site, and it does have a basement, which is used for storage. So let's address that fact up front. It's a basement. It's not built out as office. It's not leasable space. The easiest way I have to explain this is and it's not apples to apples, but if you're looking at buying a home and they quote the property as being 2,500 square feet, it's above grade space that they're talking about. It's not basement space that's included in that calculation. It's not advertised that way, etc. Now, we're in commercial, so that's different, but it's also the same in that if in the Winnipeg market, if a landlord has a building on Portage Avenue or wherever, and they have 5,000 square feet of single-story main floor space, but there's a bit of basement to it. They don't add in that basement space as leasable area into the lease that they lease out to the tenant. It may be there, and they may use it for storage, and they may pay a marginal premium on their rental rate for the main floor area, but that basement space is not included as rentable area, nor does the landlord anticipate that they're ever going to lease it out. So adding in 1742 square feet of basement area in an M3 zoned industrial area in Old St. Boniface is simply not, it's a non-starter. You would never achieve rental value for a basement such as that, nor really would you get, in my opinion, would you get a premium to the rental rate on the main floor for it. So that should be effectively removed from the calculation, and that's why we're different in terms of the area for the property. And I have viewed it, and it's simply storage space. There's no other utility to it. With regard to the buildings that are on site, rather the trailers that are on site that aren't assessed, it's because they shouldn't be assessed. They're trailers. They're not fixed buildings that are on site. They're chattels. They're removable. They can be taken away at any time, whether they've been there for 10 years or not. They're not built structures that form a part of the property, so they would not be added into the leasable area for the property. So that's a bit of background. You've got the descriptions of the other two properties there. Second one built in 78, 16-foot wall height, 6,000 square feet. And then there's the older building built in 68, considerably smaller at 1,680 square feet, built with an 18-foot wall height. They're in average condition for properties of this type in this area, I guess is how we'd say that. They're heavy industrial M3 zone properties in the heavy industrial area of St. Boniface. So we have a few pictures beginning on page 2. You can see some exteriors. You can see the gravel surfaced yard for the most part. And then we get into the interiors of the industrial buildings, and you can see the relatively standard build out of those. The site itself, we begin on page number 6. Again, the property is zoned M3, so that does restrict certainly some uses from being developed on site. And the description of it is there on page number 6. It's kind of a trapezoid, fronts on Dawson, obviously. The entire area surrounding it is zoned M3 and is all heavier industrial users. Oddly, as you move north on Dawson, there's some grandfathered homes that still remain there for some reason, but that's an aberration in the entire area. For the most part, it's very heavy industrial use. There's a former landfill site immediately adjacent to the subject where the Shell Canada site is, or close to the subject on the Shell Canada site. It is fenced, it is serviced, and the long-term owner owns a heavy construction business, utilizes the entire site, so there is no additional land. And if you look at the layout of the buildings, there's no potential to subdivide it in any nature, so that is not an issue with regard to valuation. The location is shown on page number 7, so you can see the red arrow indicating where 101 Dawson is. Again, right in the heart of the heavy industrial section of St. Boniface. And at the bottom of page number 7, this is a chart taken from City of Winnipeg document indicating the location of former landfill sites in that immediate area. And you can see that in close proximity to where the subject is, which is roughly where the number 2 is located, you have a couple of sites immediately nearby, as well as obviously the Shell oil facility. So that is the type of location that we are discussing. Definition of M3 is shown on page number 8 with regard to the zoning. It allows for heavy industrial development of a potentially noxious nature. So let's move on to the valuation. I'm not going to run through our rental comps. We are in agreement at $4.25 a square foot for the subject property. So I will leave that. I'm happy to answer any questions on those if you have any. With regard to vacancy and the expenses, page number 11, we begin on the expense side. The top of the page gives you the chart giving you year-end 2017 industrial vacancy stats. This is from the Johnson report. The Johnson report, of course, is a industry publication for commercial properties commercial real estate in Winnipeg, and they break vacancy down into the various categories. You can see the divisions there between overall investment, single tenant, and multi-tenant investment. Generally, they're pointing to cap rates of 7 and above. We have deferred to the city's cap rate of 5% in this instance, as the property is owner occupied.
You mean vacancy.
I'm sorry?
You said cap rate of 5%. I don't think you want a cap rate of 5%.
No. Did I really? Wow, I do need, I do need more sleep, don't I? I thought I got my 7 hours of sleep. Okay. So, yes, with regard to vacancy, we are deferring to the 5% capitalization rate. Now, moving on to the expense allowance issue, obviously much has been said about this. I know we have one relatively new panel member that may not have heard all of the arguments, so I will run through our detail with regard to this. Suffice it to say, the majority of the decisions that we've received in the 2020 appeal cycle are in agreement with our stance with regard to the inclusion of the 5% non-recoverable expense allowance, and we do have material to support that in the addenda. Now, let's briefly run through this. If we look at my page number 11, the expense allowance side, in 2020, the city is allowing an overall 2% allowance for what they are terming expenses simply. 2% allowance of effective gross income is used by the city of Winnipeg in the 2020 cycle. The city formerly, going back many cycles to roughly into around 2000, I believe, is when this began, somewhere in that range. City of Winnipeg has utilized a 5% management expense allowance, as shown. I don't know that I included it in the addenda because we've done this so many times now. Let me retrace my steps. City of Winnipeg formerly used 2% for a replacement reserve of effective gross income, which they termed other as an expense allowance. They also used a 5% management expense allowance that they used. This is going back in all the cycles that I mentioned to roughly the year 2000. We have the documentation to show that. I may not have included it in the addenda at this time. For the 2020 year, they have eliminated the 5% management expense allowance. Now, the management terminology is problematic and is in fact an error. It was never intended to represent the recovery of a property management fee. There is documentation to this that has been presented to the board by other appellants. I was not active back at that time frame, so I didn't have access to those documents. Simply put, the city is saying that the property management fee that they believe they were allowing for with this 5% management allowance is recoverable and should not be included as an expense allowance. Now, we're in agreement with that in that property management fees have always been recoverable. That's not a change. It hasn't changed from the year 2000 to now. I can give you leases from that time frame and earlier, right up to today, and they will generally all indicate that property management fees are recoverable as the norm in the marketplace from tenants. So this is not a change, and that is not what that 5% management was intended for, and the documents presented to this board previously illustrate that. The point of the 5% allowance was to represent the management of the property by the owner in the non-recoverable expenses that any owner will incur in the normal operation of a property that are not recoverable from a tenant in normal leasing circumstances. So that was what that 5% was always intended for. The city has eliminated it, believing that it's meant to simply reflect property management fee, and we'll show that that is not the case. Pardon me. The page number 11 still in my document here. The Appraisal Institute of Canada is the governing body of the property appraisal profession in Canada, which I belong to, as do numerous members of the property assessment department. And they're responsible for provision of education to its membership through a partnership with UBC. The standard appraisal text provided to students is the appraisal of real estate, third Canadian edition, et cetera, et cetera. And in reference to the income approach to value, it states in chapter 21, and I'm not going to run through this point by point, but it states essentially the calculation for arriving at net operating income. And if you look at the highlighted section on page number 12, it states that operating expenses that are paid by the landlord, stabilized annual expenses, are to be deducted from the effective gross income. So this is not different. Both the city as well as myself are in agreement with this, that these operating expenses paid by the landlord are to be deducted. Now, what's included in those is at issue, and the city has essentially eliminated a significant number of expense categories that in any normal circumstance would be borne by the property owner and form part of their non-recoverables. So page number 12, the reference to operating expenses paid by the landlord refers to non-recoverable operating expenses that cannot be recovered from tenants of a property through the standard operating expense recoveries. These are standard expenses incurred by a property served to reduce the overall net operating income to the owner. And these line items include, but are not limited to, professional fees, that being legal, accounting, other professional fees. Asset management, this has been made a point of by the city. It's a very it's not a typical expense in that it's used by larger real estate holding companies that may have a large number of properties to manage. We do believe that it should be included, but in the general sense of things, overall in the marketplace, it's a very minimal number of properties that have this, and the amount of it is quite small. Landlord work. Landlord work refers to bringing the building up to a base condition for tenancy. So after a tenant moves out, generally there's some work that's required to be done to a space by the landlord in order to have it to a base level of occupancy, ready for the tenant to move in and improve, or for the landlord to do tenant improvements to. So that's work that the landlord has to pay for. Leasing commissions, very obviously tenants are not going to pay for the landlord's leasing commissions for a real estate professional to put themselves as the tenant into the space. That's a cost that is borne by the landlord. Tenant improvements. Tenant improvements refers to the costs of the landlord for improving the space for the tenant to occupy. Now, this has also become an issue. Typically what happens in the marketplace is a tenant will need a certain amount of improvement to the space. The landlord will give them a tenant improvement allowance for them to do it, or the landlord will do it themselves for X amount of money. or up to X amount of money, and that gets built into the rental rate that they will pay for that space. Now, that's fine, but there's also the cost of that involved as well. And when we look at rental rates, and this has been made a point of many times, you cannot deduct those tenant improvement, the effect of that tenant improvement from the net rental rate on the income side of the equation. So you cannot say they're paying $6, but we put in X amount of money and really the net effective rate is 5, so we should be using 5. That's not permitted. So that's fine, we're all in agreement on that. But that doesn't change the fact that that money was spent and it has to be deducted from the other side of the equation. The next category, owner repair and maintenance, exclusive of structural repair being the standard 2% operating expense that's still allowed by the city, which they feel is inclusive of everything. Marketing of the space, clearly tenants are not going to be paying for marketing of the building. Tenant inducement, in competitive markets, you often have free rent that has to be supplied to tenants in order to get them to sign for your space versus a competitive building space and other things of that nature. Credit checks, and in some cases, property management fees. Now, typically, almost always, property management is recovered. There are rare cases where some tenants do not pay property management, and with regard to some government leases, there is also that issue as well, where government will not pay property management fee based on their standard structure of lease. But overall, nearly always you do recover property management fees. So those are examples of the type of expenses that are included in this non-recoverable section. And generally it adds up to a relatively significant amount. Our task, of course, is to look at market value, so we're not looking at a single point in time and saying, well, in year X, you had zero non-recoverable expenses. But if you look at the property over the span of 5 years, obviously there are those expenses and they do add up, so you have to balance those out, rather. So we looked at a 3-year historical review of properties in our firm. We had full access to year-end income and expense statements. These were all investment properties. And we looked at determining the percentage of effective gross income that these non-recoverables would form. We broke them down into 2 categories, one of them being inclusive of tenant improvements, the other being exclusive of tenant improvements. We had between 45 and 53 properties in our study between 2016 and 18. You can see the averages as shown there. And you can see that non-recoverable expenses exclusive of TI averaged 11.5% over the 3 years, with the individual amounts shown above. Non-recoverable expenses inclusive of TI averaged 12.7% with the individual amounts shown above. Now, we're not coming here today and asking for an increase to that former 5% that was allowed in the city's model. We're simply showing that the 5% is absolutely a real item and does need to be reinstituted in the valuation of these properties. So we're simply asking for the reinstitution of that 5% non-recoverable allowance, as well as the 2%, which is representative of the structural allowance for the property. So an overall 7% expense allowance. On the shortfall allowance, we are deferring to the $3.75 for the city of Winnipeg. Now, moving on to capitalization rate. As stated in the 2018 decision, the decision at the Board of Revision was based on my capitalization rate of 8%. If we look at some of the main commercial brokerages in the city, Colliers and CB Richard Ellis. They're stating capitalization rate ranges for investment grade industrial assets between 6.5 and 7.25% for Colliers, and 6% to 7.25% for CB Richard Ellis. Now, when these organizations put out their studies, what they're showing essentially is the peak of the market, or towards the peak of the market. So this is the narrow range in which they would be selling your typical industrial investment assets with multi-tenants or single tenants of various sizes throughout the city, but generally speaking, properties that a typical investor would be interested in acquiring for the net income that is generated by them. Now, this would very obviously not include heavy industrial properties. Typically, the risk that's viewed by lenders in putting mortgages on these properties is significantly higher if you're looking at lending on a property that's in an M3 zoned area with former landfill sites nearby, other noxious producers nearby, etc. The mortgage lenders obviously apply a premium to any lending that they'll do on acquisition of properties such as this. The potential tenants for these types of properties is more manufacturing oriented and dirty. They're typically more dirty uses, if you can term it that way, than typical warehouse industrial properties. And as mentioned, they're typically less attractive to your knowledgeable investor due to the perceived risks and actual risks with these properties. Generally speaking, they're acquired by owner occupants. So on that front, there are significantly less capitalization rates of M3 properties out there to be developed due to the lack of tenants in properties such as this. So there is certainly less information out there on cap rates for properties of this type, but in looking at the available leases, etc., and purchase prices, you can see that cap rates would be significantly higher than standard investment multi-tenant properties. So we have applied a capitalization rate of 8%. I did not include my cap rate study for some reason in this particular one, but I'll refer to it in the other properties today so we can cover that. Our 8% is matches the cap rate from the last cycle. Really, you're not going to see any transition in that between that cycle to this one. So our final market value is $453,000. And if we look at the addenda material, I think I've included the income expense, which is simply expense. Comes to roughly $200,000. You have the attributes of the subject property from the city of Winnipeg. And then we have supportive decisions from various boards before the 2020 Board of Revision with regard to the inclusion of the 5% into the valuation model and the acceptance of that argument from various appellants. So that is my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Questions, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is your second cycle with this property, is that correct?
It is, yes.
And it was handled by a different agent in 2016, are you aware of that?
I'm not sure who
Okay.
had done the property prior to that time.
So it did go to the Board of Revision in 2016, and are you aware that the decision in 2016 was $506,000?
I'm not aware of that, and I'm not in any way relying upon what had happened prior to my timeframe.
Just one more question. On page 7, your map showing the former landfills.
Yes.
So the one south of Narren, there is buildings on that former site?
There are buildings in that location, yes.
Okay.
It's a different circumstance, I believe.
Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Okay, Brent, any questions?
I have no questions.
No questions. I guess I have no questions, I mean, we kind of flogged the 5% issue.
We'll only do it once.
Okay, oh, I did have one question, sorry, it wasn't on the 5%. The storage, what do they store down there?
Files and I don't think it's, I think it's to do with the business, right? So it's paperwork and it's not, product or anything like that. They're a heavy industrial user, so there's no product down there.
Okay, thank you for that. All right. We shall move to 571 Messier Street. Okay, you can begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subject's located at 571 Messier Street. Roll number is 0605169160. This is directly across the street from the previous property. It is leased by Nelson River Construction, who is the owner of the previous property, and we are valuing this parcel as vacant land. Defending a 2020 assessed value at $1,901,000 today. I'll note that the 2018 was at $1,445,000, and that was not appealed by the owner. Property description, there is one building on this property. It was built in 1920. We are not assessing that property. I spoke to somebody who inspected that property a few years ago and stated it might be the worst property they've ever been in. So the land, which we are assessing today, is zoned M3 heavy manufacturing. There is 437,700 square feet of land. And we've applied a rate on page 3 to that 437,700 of $4.34, which yields the assessment of $1,901,000. I will note that there was a 33% reduction applied to this land model. Originally it was much higher. It was reduced by $936,353 due to some of the issues that were ongoing previously. So we can see the parcel summary below. We are not assessing the replacement cost of the buildings, which is only $10,000, but simply the land at $4.34. There was a sale on this property in 2018 in January. Sworn value was $308,000, but there was some issues with that sale that I will address. On page 4 is my first set of land comparables. These are all in the Mission Industrial Park, same as the subject. So on the left-hand column, we can see the subject, 437,700 square feet, zoned M3. I have 5 comparables, all in the same industrial park. First one's at 975 Marion. I'll note that all these sites are smaller. Ranging from 49, just under 50,000 to just over 63,000. All zoned M3 heavy manufacturing. The sale dates range from 12 to 2015. And we can see the sale prices per square foot in the third last column from the bottom. First one, 975 Marion, that's at $6.15 per square foot. The second one, 975 Mission Street, that's at $5.82. 975 Mission, actually same parcel, sold roughly a year apart. Went from $5.82 up to $6.47 in that year. Fourth comparables on Mission Street as well. That was at $5 a square foot, and the Adjacent parcel to that one is comparable 5 at $5.05 a square foot. On page 5, I have some large sale comparables, closer in size to the comparable, or the subject, sorry. First one's Hutchings, 319,000 square feet. Zoned M2, obviously in a different location. This one was contaminated, sold for $6.89 a square foot in 15. 65 Hyde, this is Oak Point Highway area, 229,700 square feet. That one has rail line, no sewer, no water, so unserviced site, $6.57 a square foot. 615 Mission, 128,000 square feet, zoned M3, has a rail line influence. That was at $4.03 a square foot. That was in 2016. 663 Marion, 126,000 square feet, sold in 14 for $5.14 a square foot. And 25 Foster, sold in 17 for $6 a square foot, just under 120,000 square feet. So I have some photographs of the subject property starting on page 7. Aerial photograph, obviously in the Mission Industrial Park across from the previous property. Nelson River leases this property to store its machinery. Some aerial photographs on page 8. You can see the bottom one's 2014. This is when it was a scrapyard before, the left-hand portion of the property. I did tour this site in about 2005-ish when I was looking for some scrap metal for a project. 2018, we can see it in its current form. It's being used for storage for heavy equipment. On page 9, we have the sales mailer. This is for the 2018 sale. Arm's length transaction, they did not check any boxes between related parties, but they did state that there was work required on the land, so the, you know what, I'll get into it on the following page. Page 11, this is the lease with option to purchase agreement from the 2014. This had to do with the 2014 sale at $725,000. So it's between UCanco General Partners Inc. and Magnet Industries Limited. We can turn to page 12. The term was for 36 consecutive months. And then on page 13, there was some remedial aspect to this lease. Commencing on the first day of the term of the lease, the tenant shall, through its own forces and employees, or through the forces and employees of qualified experience and insured contractors and subcontractors, diligently perform in accordance with industry standards and good engineering practice all work necessary to achieve remedial endpoint. Prior to the expiration of the term, the price and cost to the landlord should not exceed $1,630,000. Aerial photograph on page 16. This one's interesting. This is from 1949, so we can see the site. That was part of that package that we received with that lease. Page 17, we have the 2014 sales mailer showing the sale price at $725,000, and that was when before it was remediated. And now you can see the property, the purchaser was UCanco General Partners. They bought it from Shell Canada Products Limited. Income and expense statements starting on page 19. This is the 2015 statement. You can see the lease was $1,000 a month for 41,000 square feet. Page 21, we have the 2016 lease that went up to $4,000 a month for 5 acres. And then in 2018, it went up to $7,000 for 300,000 square feet. Some pictures of my land comparables on page 22, starting on page 22. So the first comparable at Marion Street, comparables 2 and 3, which was the same parcel that sold a year apart on Mission Street. Comparable 4, also on Mission Street, as is comparable 5. Comparable 6 is on Hutchings, that was the contaminated site. Comparable 7 on Hyde. Comparable 8 on Mission, comparable 9 on Marion, and the last page is comparable 10 on Foster Street. So based on that, we ask that the land value assessment be confirmed at $1,901,000. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I have a few. So looking at your page number 16,
Yes.
and the aerial from 1949 there. So the city's aware, of course, that it was a former oil refinery?
Yes,
On the
it's owned by
site?
Shell, yes.
Okay, so that's the background of the property. Page 17, sale questionnaire. So in I'm trying to read your date here, March 2014, it traded for $725,000.
Correct, and at that point, it was contaminated.
Okay, and if we move backwards to, I guess, page 11 onwards, so this was, I guess, the new owner, You Can't Go General Partners, and they leased it to my client, which is Magnet Industries, who then subsequently bought it.
Correct.
Looking at the option to purchase, page number 17.
17?
Yeah, page 17. So I'm reading through the option to purchase there, and,
I think page 14, perhaps?
oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at their numbers rather
Oh,
than yours.
okay, yeah.
My mistake. Roughly 2/3 of the way through, it says, at such closing, the purchase price which tenant shall pay landlord shall be $1,775,000, which at landlord's election shall be reduced by amounts landlord owes tenant pursuant to section 7.03, resulting in a corresponding reduction of landlord's debt to tenant. So 7.03 was part of the remedial obligations of tenants, so that would be with regard to cleanup costs, I'm
Correct.
imagining, correct? So their stated option to purchase price from late 2014 was $1,775,000 to be reduced by any expenses.
Correct.
All right, just looking at the comparables then, page number 4. Each of these are in generally the same area. Would you agree they're each roughly 1/8 of the size of the subject?
They're all significant.
Okay, so that would probably drive a higher sale price indicator.
Using economies of scale, that would.
Okay. And each of these, so just looking at them, 975 Marion Street, comparable 1, that's where National Concrete Accessories built their office and warehouse building, is that correct?
I
Across from
didn't
Dole.
look past the vacant sale date to what happened to them post-sale.
Okay, but it's on the north side of Marion, north of where the Domo is, I believe.
That sounds correct.
And the properties on Mission, again, Mission would be if you head up Archibald, just before the rail underpass, Mission is the street that you would take an east on to head over to Panet.
Right by the mushroom farm, which we're gonna hear today.
There is also the mushroom farm there, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these are each smaller parcels that are on that frontage?
Correct.
Okay. And looking at page 5 and the comps that are there, the Hutchings Street property, this is essentially the last remaining large land parcel in the Inkster Industrial Park, correct?
That would be correct.
Okay, and what is the background with regard to the contamination of the site? Is it?
That I'm not aware of.
Okay. Looking at the other ones, 615 Mission would be, I guess, the closest in relation to the subject at $4.03 a square foot. It's roughly a quarter the size of the property as well.
Yes.
Okay.
A third, quarter to third, yeah.
Yeah. I think those are all of my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, any questions?
Just reflecting on your comparables, and the question was asked relating to any of these sites having any need for remediation. Do you have a sense what a relative value or impact to the relative value would be on a site that has had an issue previously but that has been remediated?
Well, even just talking about the subject property, we can
Yes.
see that the value was set in 2014 at 1.7,
Yeah.
1.775. They bought it for 338, so we can deduce what the expenses would have been to remediate. Roughly, 1,400,000 something.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I may have zoned out at one point, but the large site comparables on your page 5, did any of these ever require remediation?
Hutchings was contaminated at the time of sale. We can see that in the land influence.
Yes.
I don't know if it's been remediated since.
I see. Okay. All right, no other questions, thanks.
I have no questions.
Okay. Could the Hutchings site be influenced by I guess it would be probably announced but not yet happening Centerport developments?
That's possible. Like Mr. Smith mentioned, it was the last remaining large site in Inkster, which might have affected the price as well. But at 689, we're using 440, so 434. So still, even with an adjustment for that, I still feel we're in the ballpark.
Okay. No other questions, so you can proceed, Mr. Smith.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my photos of the worst property in the city of Winnipeg are probably unnecessary, so we'll just skip those. In any case, I did include them just in case they were necessary. This is obviously a holdover from the original 1920 development of the property as an oil refinery for Shell. So you can disregard the material on that. We can skip over that. We're simply dealing with land value for the subject. So we're looking at an M3 zoned site. Again, the zoning is critical with regard to establishing value for these properties. And we're also dealing with a relatively large site of just over 10 acres, 10.05, 437,700 square feet. And if we look at the city's page number 8 in their brief, you can see 2018 aerial is shown at the top of the page, and 2014 at the bottom. My client had leased a portion of the site in that 2014 timeframe, but additionally you can see storage of heavy equipment at that timeframe on the site as well. So there hasn't, certainly there's been a change with regard to the west-hand side of the site and the usage of it, and that it's now used for storage of heavy equipment as well. But back in the 2014 timeframe, the site was also utilized for storage of trailers and heavy equipment, as you can see, as shown there. Moving on to the valuation for the subject. The site is shown on my page number 5. It fronts on Messier Street and is bounded on, I guess you would call that the northeast sector by a railway, as well as Dawson Road to the north of the railway. So it abuts the railway on that side. To the west of it is essentially a scrapyard with a very similarly aged building as the one that's on site here that is utilized for storage of scrap materials, as well as the exterior yard and the yard to the north of that. So that's what the property is bound by. Equally heavy industrial uses on the south side of Messier. Messier itself, I'm not sure if we showed a photo of the, oh, it was snowy that day when we were there, so can't get a good indication of the roadway itself. Needless to say, it's not quite the same as being on Mission in terms of condition and access, etc. Page number 7, I've included detail with regard to M3 manufacturing. Again, the M3 zoning limits the type of use for the property. And we also have the issues with regard to obsolescence. So if you look at the middle obsolescence, economic obsolescence as shown there, it states, and this is standard appraisal terminology again, this occurs when a property loses value because of external factors such as local traffic pattern changes or construction of public nuisance type of properties and utilities, such as county jails, sewer treatment plants, etc. on adjoining properties. So it's not that there are any new changes with regard to the subject, but if you look at the location of the property on my page number 6, indicating where it is, as we've noted, this is in the heavy industrial area of St. Boniface, probably the heaviest industrial area of the city. You have the Shell Canada refinery to the east, significant issue there. We have another property that we'll deal with today, the mushroom plant, which is located to the north of this, roughly at the corner of Mission and McTavish, and to the south, kind of off-screen, southeast, I guess, Dougal and Lagimodier. You have the meat rendering plant, as well as a separate and more noxious use. There's a company on side street off of Lagimodier there that deals with the waste products from the rendering plant, and they process those into further usable products, and it creates a significant smell in the area as well, which kind of affects this entire region. So that is what we're referring to with regard to the impact of economic obsolescence in the area. So when you're buying a land parcel, the highest and best use of it is to obviously construct a building on site and lease that out in order to maximize your return on the property. Well, you need to be conscious of whether you can tenant that property and what lease rates you can tenant it at. Is it economically viable to construct on a site such as this, and what can you pay for that land in order to build a property to produce those lease rates. So it all fits together as part of the puzzle. So this serves to drive down values for properties that experience these issues. So let's move on to the valuation itself, page number 8. We have a range of sales here for the panel to consider. 9 different sales that we have. Obviously, they go back in time, and it's presenting more history for the area rather than specific comparables when we get to the older ones. So the subject itself, 10 acres, 437,700. The first sale, 330 Mazenod, just under 16 acres, traded in February 2016 for a sale price per square foot of $3.80 a square foot. This is, pardon me, service land that was south of Dugald and was developed with a modern industrial structure for Parmalat in that St. Boniface area. 733 La Jamogier is the second sale here, May 2014, 12 acres, $3.63 a square foot. 733 La Jamogier. This was a service land parcel with frontage on La Jamogier, north of Fermor Boulevard. So as you head north from Fermor and La Jamogier, the road bends westward and then straightens out. It's in that immediate area where that land parcel is. So our most recent sizable land sales of over 10 acres are in that $3.63 to $3.80 a square foot. Each of these properties would be considered superior in terms of location to the subject property. We then have further sales of smaller parcels that go back in time as well as older ones. Obviously, the older ones in the Archibald Marion area, I think I have some description with regard to them. These were sales of the former, I forget what they refer to that land in St. Boniface as, the former meatpacking area on the south side of the road there. Obviously back in time, but they were zoned M3 and had significant impacts and sold for a very nominal amount. Now, we're not asking for anything in that region, but we do provide that for background. There's also the sale at 1266 Dugald, which was a significant size, 112 acres roughly. And this property sold for roughly 43 cents per square foot, and I give you an indication of where that property is. Now, access to that property is not the greatest. It would have to be created essentially off of Dugald at the edge of the property to the east and come backwards. So that certainly affected the price for it. And it does abut the rail line there, similar to the subject, but it traded for 43 cents a square foot. Now it's roughly 12 times the size, so that would have an impact on value certainly as well. So we're not pointing towards that as where the property should lie. Looking at the location of the property, the zoning, the history of the property, the relatively poor access and infrastructure for this property in comparison to others, other standard industrial land sales that have better servicing, etc. We're looking at a value indicator of $2.50 a square foot. Now, if we look at the city's sale comparables, I would point you towards the upper end of the sale comparison range, being roughly $4.03 a square foot for comparable 8, which is again 25%, 25-30% the size of the subject property. without the stigma that would be attached to the subject property with regard to being a former oil refinery. Now, I don't question that the property has been, it's had significant work done to it with regard to remediation, and that the property was then sold. However, that doesn't necessarily remove the stigma from the marketplace with regard to the background of the property nor the value of it. And it would be impacted by that history, whether the property has been remediated or not. So $2.50 a square foot is appropriate for the subject, and that gives us our value of $1,094,000. And I believe the addenda simply includes income and expense, and that's really it.
Okay, questions, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So turning to your page 8 with your land sale comparables. First one, 330 Mazenod, you stated that that was serviced. Are you aware that it was actually unserviced at the time of the sale and it cost $8.2 million to service?
We were informed that servicing was at the edge of the property, essentially. I'm not aware of any additional costs that they incurred beyond that, but if that's the case, okay.
I do have some rebuttal for that, which I will,
If that's,
I'll address
if that's the
after.
case.
Inksbrook, your third comparable, that backs onto a very large retention pond and has some setbacks that they're not allowed to build on. You're aware of that?
I am, but Inksbrook is a vastly superior industrial location than the subject property.
Okay. Your last, from 5, comparable 5 down to comparable 9, those are all 8+ years post, or before the reference date?
Absolutely, and I'm acknowledging that. We're not really referring to them with regard to as direct comparables. We're merely referring to large industrial sale and history in that immediate area.
Okay. Just quickly, comparables 5 and 6 were unserviced. Are you aware of that? At
I
the
am,
time of
yes.
sale? Okay. 1750 Dugald was a City of Winnipeg sale for a new police station. It was actually a $1 sale. The 255 was a sworn value.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, we're not placing any reliance on
Of course.
5 through 9 here, so I do acknowledge.
And the last two, I think you mentioned, were the stockyards bought by Canadians.
Yeah, and the point of including those was large-scale impacted land of an M3 nature in that area. Now, they're significantly out of date, but that is the history of, and gives an indication of the impact on land value.
And just one more about Mazenod. It's roughly 50% bigger than the subject.
It is, yes.
And that could affect, using economies of scale, that could affect the sale price?
It could, but significantly less so than a smaller site. You have many more buyers for smaller sites that drive land values higher as the sites move up in size. Obviously, there are fewer buyers, and it has a lesser impact in terms of the overall change.
Okay, thank you. Last set of questions is relating to 1266 Dugald. Of course, you stated you're not explicitly relying on that, but you mentioned there's no road access. This is right after the overpass. There's significant hurdles to creating access. Really,
There
the
is.
only way to do it is through a neighboring property.
That's correct, and again, we acknowledge that, and that does have an impact on the sale price and sale price per square foot for that property.
Okay, and just a few more notes about that property. It is unserviced, you're aware of that?
Yes.
It's low-lying with poor drainage. It's divided by an aquifer, and it has rail borders on 2 sides, which the subject also has on 1 side.
Yeah, there are a lot of issues with regard
Of
to
course.
that within question.
Those are my questions. I do have rebuttal, Mr. Chairman, but
We'll do the panel questions first and then get to your rebuttal. So, Jeff, any?
I do. You indicated you're not relying on your comparables 5 through 9. You acknowledged that Mazenot is quite a bit larger, and I look at your comparables 3 and 4, and they're quite a bit smaller. You indicated that there's an increased market for smaller properties. So how would you characterize your comparable 3 and 4 as a good comparable? Or is it? Are they?
Well, so I'll run through them here quickly. So 3 and 4, so the Inksbrook area, as you head up Oak Point Highway, is that new development
Yes.
up there, brand new sites. And what you're finding being developed there is, modern, either flex warehouse buildings or significantly sized investment properties. Very high quality, very modern, and the land values up there are significantly greater than they would be in old St. Boniface zoned M3. Different zoning up there as well, different rules. It's dramatically different. So what we're essentially showing there is that this is what's being paid towards the upper end of the market for a smaller site at 463 square foot. The Mazenod property, yes, it is larger than the subject, subject being 10 acres, this being almost 1585. So I do acknowledge it's larger. It's often hard to find properties that are exactly the same size for comparability as the city will find as well. So it's a matter of finding the best comparables. This is relatively in the same area, and is of a significant size, and there's many fewer significant size sales out there. And that traded at $3.80 a square foot as noted.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Brent?
If you turn to page 5, and I'm looking at Messier Street, is it gravelled in that section?
I believe it is a hard surface. I wouldn't say it's paved like, like Marion or Lajimoji or anything, but yeah, I believe that it's hard surface. When I drove on it, it was snow covered, so I was unable to say. I think
I drive on it every day, it's not a good road.
No.
It's
not
got
a-
potholes, there's a train crossing.
Yeah. And that was my
So it's
understanding.
essentially gravelled.
Yeah, a lot of people use it to cut off of Dawson onto, or Dugald onto.
And there's heavy construction equipment that goes, so it's in poor shape, which I think I pointed out. That's my understanding.
So that brings my last question. Is this part of Messier serviced?
There is servicing on certainly on the south side, because there is you can see the corner of the building at the bottom of page 5 there.
Right.
There's servicing to that site, and I know that the building on site is unserviced. I am not 100% certain whether they have water, et cetera there. I don't think that they would have sewer in that spot.
Good,
I'm
'cause I
afraid
guess
that I don't have that detail, but
The previous use was a junkyard, correct?
correct, yes.
I'm not sure there was any point in extending services.
There would be a significant cost involved to extending any services onto site to develop for a higher use, so obviously that has an impact. If the best use is surface storage, then that has certainly an impact on value.
Okay, those are my questions, thanks.
Okay, and I have no questions. So you said you had some rebuttal to hand out?
Thanks.
So just quickly speaking about the servicing, I did check on our aerial maps, there is water service. I am unaware if there's sewer, but if we look at Mr. Smith's brief on page 4, there is lights in the building and there is some conduit running up the wall. So I would assume there was electrical at some point. Regarding my rebuttal, page 2, this is, 330 Mazenod was purchased by Parmalee. 15 acres just south of the St. Boniface Industrial Park in the first highlighted section. On page 3, I've highlighted 3 paragraphs. Servicing costs for the site are expected to run about 8.2 million, the city said, of which 2.5 million will be offset by the sale proceeds paid by Parmalee, which was the sale price that was mentioned. So I guess it would be 8.2 to service it, but minus the sale price. An agreement was reached in principle with the company and the province. The city would front end the province's 2 million share of the remaining 5.61 million in servicing costs, while Parmalee contributed 1.5 million. So I believe the sale was listed at the 2.625. However, there was the servicing factor. Service on page 4, servicing work to be done will include both temporary and permanent road to the site, drainage, street lighting, extension of electrical and natural gas services, water mains, wastewater sewers, and a wastewater lift station, and partial construction of a stormwater retention basin. So obviously there's a lot of aspects that the subject wouldn't be required to do, but it does throw that sale into question. Page 5 is simply pretty much the same information, this time from the Winnipeg Free Press. They mention the 8.2 in servicing, the different contributions by the different levels. Turning to page 8, 1266 Dugald, we've spoken about that. I don't believe any of that is in question. And page 9, finally, this is the Inksbrook site. You can see the size of the retention pond and the setbacks. It is low-lying property. The lot slopes from street level 6 feet down to the setback and 8 feet down to the lot line. And then there's some significant costs for some fill required, about $90,000. So definitely a superior location, but there was some drawbacks to that site at the time of sale. And that's my rebuttal, pending questioning. Thank you.
Any questions on your button?
Just quickly, so let's look at the Inksbrook ones, we just wrapped up with that. So I'm looking at the site, this modern industrial development, correct?
Correct.
It is. I'm looking at the other parcels there, you can see that they have the same setbacks from the retention pond at the rear, is that correct?
That's correct. That's pretty
Okay,
standard.
So this is, the amount being paid is reflective of the area that they're able to develop on in that area, right? So if they, theoretically, if they could develop on the whole site, they would be higher, would they not? If they had a flat site without any influence of this setback from the drainage, the site, they would probably have paid more for that land, correct?
Correct, but you have the site listed at 91,725, whereas the actual usable space is closer to 46,200.
Well, and that.
Or
that's
minus
fair.
that.
That's fair, usable area, and we didn't go to that level of detail of doing the usable versus the amount that they purchased, but the amount they purchased was as stated, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The 1266 Dugald, so yes, we covered that. Again, we're not saying that these are directly comparable, and we've acknowledged the challenges with establishing access to that site and division of it, et cetera. When I look at the Parmalat sale, so the sale price was as stated, and to that amount, the company itself is expected to contribute roughly 1.5 million, right? So their costs are in the area of $1.5 million more for servicing for that particular site. Not 8.2, correct? That would-
Correct.
That would include government participation.
If it was serviced, I'm contending that if it was serviced, the sale price would be a lot higher.
And would we, okay, that's my only question, really.
Okay, Brent, any questions on the rebuttal?
I have no question.
I have none, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break till 20 to 11.
Did I answer questions? I'm not sure.
I believe you did.
Of yourselves. Did you have questions?
Well, I asked you about the service.
The mushroom plants, 556 Mission Street. You can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subject's located at 556 Mission Street, roll number 0605096 quadruple 0. This is Love Day Mushroom Farms. Defending a 2020 assessed value of $4,088,000. This is classification 30, which is farm property. There have not been any appeals on this property since 2010. 2018 was set at $3,806,000, which was
Okay,
not.
if I can interrupt, that settles it then, because I remember hearing an appeal on this property, so it must have been when I was sitting on the municipal board.
It did go to the
Before-
municipal board for the classification, yeah, with
Yeah,
Chuck Chappell, I believe.
All right,
So it represents an increase of 7.4% over last cycle, which, like I mentioned, was not appealed. This is an industrial property consisting of 2 buildings, both 1-story, 1947 and 1998. Wall heights of 15 and 18 feet respectively. Zoned M3 heavy manufacturing. Land area of 237,803 square feet and a leasable area of 116,228. All that's in dispute today is the expenses and the caps, so I will skip my rental comparables and go right to the page 4, which is my income workup. So we have 5,414 square feet at $4.35 and 110,814 at $3.07, generating gross potential of 363,750. Reduce that by 5% vacancy, 2% expenses, and $3.75 shortfall. Capitalize that at 7.75%, which yields our final value at $488,000 rounded. On page 6 are my capitalization rates, which I've been through. This property is at 775, right up against the 80th percentile for our model generated cap rates. Page 7 just shows some sample cap rates, not relying on these, not meant to be comparable, it's just to illustrate some sales in the marketplace. Page 8 is our non-recoverable expense sampling. I did not go over that on the first property. I won't go over it again, but it is there for you to read if you'd like to. There is some samples of some properties showing a range from between 0.9 up to 2.67. Median at 1.12. Photographs of the subject property starting on page 10. We all know where this is located, on the corner of Archibald, McTavish and Mission. Aerial photograph, bottom of page 10. Exterior photographs, page 11. Continuing on to page 12 with another aerial shot below that. Page 13, just a couple snapshots of their website. I'll note on at the bottom of page 13, they are stating that over the last 3 years, and I don't know when this was written, they had invested over $2 million in advanced technologies to improve the quality of air. Of course, that's a business expense and not really relying on any of that. There's some pictures of the interior on page 14. And then we have a sketch of the building areas on page 15. Page 16 shows the income and expense. Once again, this is owner occupied, so there's no rents to be extracted from that. And based on that evidence, we ask that the assessment be confirmed at $4,088,000. Thank you.
any questions, Mr. Smith?
Just two really, so the investment in air quality is not a real estate issue essentially?
No, of course not.
Okay. And then the cap rate that is used for the subject, 7.75%, that's model driven based on age and...
Age, size, location.
Right. So 7.75, that would be under the 80th percentile, 7.8%.
Correct.
Okay, and roughly half the building here, well, a little under half the building built in 1947?
Correct.
Okay, those are all my questions, thank you.
All right, Brent, any questions?
No, Mr. Smith just took my question.
Jeff, anything?
They are right questions. I tend to do that.
That's okay. It's great.
Okay, all right, then you can proceed with your presentation.
Okay, thank you. As stated, we're in agreement with many of the issues here, including the low rental rate, given the type of property that it is, vacancy, shortfall. I'm not going to go through our discussion of non-recoverable expenses again, so we'll just make it specific to the site itself here. 556 Mission Street is, of course, the Loveday Mushroom Plant. They have been operating since prior to 1947. They were located in a different location before they built on this site here, the original structure of just under 53,000 square feet, 15-foot exterior wall height, so certainly on the low end of the scale in terms of interior clear heights for modern industrial use. It's essentially a special use property, and the layout is unlike anything you'd probably find. I'm just going to get you to turn to page number 8, and the site description. This will probably help us somewhat. If we look at Mission Street being on the north there, the far northwest corner, there's a very small office area up front there, with some changing areas and bathrooms, etc. Very basic in nature. If you look at the area fronting along Mission, that is a growing area. We'll look at those rooms. They're very specific to their particular use. Would have very low transferability to other users. The demising in there is very significant. There's many individual long narrow rooms with relatively low ceilings in that section. On the west side of the property along McTavish, you have the same thing of the same growing rooms located along that section. In the rear of the building, which is the newer part, I believe, is the newer part of the building, there's also some issues with regard to layout for a standard use, as well as some special use development of the structure itself that would have very low transferability. So the utility of this property would be very low for most other users in the marketplace. You're not going to find direct transferability to virtually any other users. It couldn't be used for, say, production of medical grade marijuana or anything of that nature, due to it simply wouldn't meet the qualifications for it. So let's move inside and have a look at a few of the pictures. There's some exteriors on page number 2 and the top of page 3. You can see some of the loading. The site is gravelled. On the exterior of the site, they have a significant composting component of their business that is done on site. Moving inside, you can see an example of the demising of the building. As I was stating, this is a packing room, this particular one, but this is what their growing rooms look like as well. And you can see the original wooden structure, condition of the property, etc. And that's pretty standard for the majority of those growing rooms. Moving onwards, you can see some more of the interior at the top of page 4 and bottom of page 4. So this would be the hallway outside of the front of the area section, the section fronting on Mission Street, so those growing rooms. And in behind that would be packing rooms and more shipping related issues. Now, in that In that other newer area, if you look at page number 5, this is located in that section. These are, again, related to the development of the composting. There's a whole section of these long, narrow, dark tunnels as shown there. Again, virtually no transferability to others. You have an area with significant trench as well, also related to the use of the compost. Some photos of the office area and the basic nature of it, cement floor, low ceiling, etc. That's the type of property that we're looking at. So we're in agreement on the rent. I won't run through that. We've had this use in place for many years, so the property is worn as can be seen from the photos. The issue of obsolescence, if you look at my page number 10, obviously property such as this has significant obsolescence due to the architectural design, style, size, layout, etc. There'd be virtually very, very exceptionally few tenants or users that could use it in its current configuration, which would have an impact on market value, obviously. The issue of economic obsolescence, well, it's not so much that it's obsolete to the current tenant, although it is. They have another facility outside of the city as well. They still fully utilize this one, but they obviously wouldn't design a building in this fashion if they were to build it today. They wouldn't have a 116,000 square foot building laid out as it is on a site such as this, but they are there, and that is the property that they have, so they continue to use it. But in terms of utility to others, it would certainly be on the low side. Adding to that, I guess, would be the stigma of perhaps the use of the site. I'm not sure what the process would be for any remediation of issue with composting on site or smells in the building, etc. If one were to look at a purchase of a property such as this. In any case, let's move on to the valuation itself. As mentioned, we're in agreement with the rental rate and on the expense side, so that leaves us with cap rate. Much of what I've been talking about here is related to cap rate. So looking at my page number 16, we have a large scale owner-occupied manufacturing property, a finance property. Not an investment property by most, nearly all standard market investors, I would state. Factors that need to be considered in arriving at an appropriate cap rate for the subject property would be that it's a special purpose building, limited utility to others, high capital investment expenses, you've got a large roof area, there'd be a lot of upgrading to do. It's certainly probably on the higher side in terms of size for the market, in terms of the property of its type, limited ability to convert to multi-tenancy, and there'd be significant cost related to that. Vacancy risk of a single large tenant. The functional and physical obsolescence that we discussed, and then perhaps, as mentioned previously, issues with regard to financing of M3 zoned farm property of a category such as this. You typically face higher financing costs, I would suggest, with regard to the real estate, perhaps not the business. So we've given you a chart of capitalization rates, essentially representing the range of the market from a low of 6.6% for a standard multi-tenant investment property well located in August of 2017 on Century Street being our first comp, up to the higher end of roughly 8.3% for a property in southwest Winnipeg in 2015, again a multi-tenant facility. Now, The bulk of these sales are in and around 7 to 7.5%, which is typically where we're seeing the investment market for industrial in City of Winnipeg in the relevant time frame. There are some that are superior to that, such as the Century, that are below that. Obviously, there's ones that are above that. And then you have properties such as this that would fall well outside of that parameter and would not fit the mold of any investment property. So if you look at all of the issues that I brought up above and take them into consideration, obviously it'd be a significant premium to the cap rate. You're also located in an area of heavier industrial use, dirtier uses. There's many less tenants for properties of this type, as well as purchasers as well. So in the end, we have utilized a cap rate certainly towards the upper end of what we would see in the market at 9%. We're again not shooting for the moon here and saying this should be an 11% cap rate or anything like that, hoping that we get 9. It's that I think if you were to sell this on the marketplace, as our task is here today to establish market value, you would get roughly a 9% cap in the market. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. The addenda, again, just includes the income and expense as well as supportive material from other decisions.
Okay, questions?
No questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Brent, any questions?
I have no questions.
Okay. Sure, this one?
All right.
We move into pink flamingo territory into Transcona. So, 770 Pandora Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subject's located at 770 Pandora Avenue East, roll number 090104188800. This is the former Palliser plant, defending a 2020 assessed value of $17,810,000 today. However, I have a revised income workup on page 7, I believe. Yeah. With a revised value of $16,026,000 rounded, which is what I will be defending today. Parcel consists of 10 buildings, all one story, built between 1973 and 2002. Wall heights ranging from 11 to 44 feet. The land area, this is a gigantic parcel of land, just under 5.5 million square feet. And it is a large building as well, at 451,489 square feet. I will note the land to plan ratio is at 12.2 to 1, obviously due to the large size of the parcel. I have some rental comparables on page 3. Obviously difficult to find comparables of this size, especially close to the reference date. I chose some of the largest ones available, all from 2015, save one from 2014, late 2014. The sizes range from 80,510 square feet up to 189,827, so all significantly smaller than the subject. But the subject has been demised in 2 smaller sections and went from a single tenant to multi-tenant property. We can see the wall heights for the comparables ranging from 17 to 36 feet. Years built ranging from 68 to 98. And the net rents ranging from $4.65 all the way up to $6.01 per square foot. There is excess land value on this property. on page 4 shows the calculation of that. We're using a rate of $2.69 a square foot. On 2,585,321. Actually, that $2.69 is the rate, the model rate for the entire parcel. That calculates the land value of the entire parcel at $14,672,000, which is close to the assessed value. You can see the cost summary below that. All buildings minus depreciation at $6,502,000, plus the land value at $14,672,000. Total cost value would be $21,174,000. However, we're doing this on income today, so we're not relying on that. The excess land value is $4,402,000 rounded, and that's based on an area of $2,585,321 at $1.70. So we've lowered the rate for the excess land. There are some issues with this land which we will see coming forward. Land comparable sales on page 5. I took the largest land sales available. First one is 780 Marion, which was the stockyards. Close to the subject at just over $5.5 million. Zoned M3, 2016 sale at $7.1 million. The sale price was actually $1, but the sworn value was $7.1 million. That works out to $1.25 per square foot. That is contaminated land. 330 Mazenod, which we saw earlier, works out to $380, but we know that there's some servicing issues with that property. The sale price would have been much higher to reflect that. 733 Lage-Morier, which we saw previously as well, has a heavy traffic land influence, 523,000 square feet at 1.9 million, which works out to $3.63 a square foot. Hutchings, which we saw once again, contaminated land, sold in 15 for just under 2.2 million, works up to $6.89 a square foot. And 695 Camille Sis in St. Boniface Industrial Park, sold in 14, 317,000 square feet, and that sold for $345. On page 6 was my original model-driven income approach. I subsequently revised that, which can be shown on page 7, which is why there's a reduction from 17.8 million down to 16 and change. So what I did was I raised the rent on the 235,806 square foot portion from $1.94 to $2.50. The average rent for the entire parcel at 451,489 is $3.18. I increased the vacancy to 12 from 2.5. This site, formerly Palliser, after that it was turned into a multi-tenant property. Cabela's moved out prior to the reference date, which is why I increased the vacancy. Cabela's was occupying a large portion of this property at the time. NOI calculates to $1,046,155. We've capitalized that at 9%, which is right at the top end of our capitalization rates. Obviously, acknowledging the risk of a large building in a large site like this. So the income-based value was $11,623,943. To that, we have the excess land, which I've shown a calculation for at $4,402,000. This gives us our total value of $16,026,000 rounded. This represents an 18.7% increase over last cycle, which is in line with the average increase. I will quickly note that if we used my NOI with a 9.25 cap, it would be $15,721,000 with the excess land, of course. That would be a 16.5% increase, and if we use 9.5 with the excess land, it would be $15,423,000, which would represent a 14.25% increase. Capitalization rates, once again, we've used 9. That's right up near the high end of our spectrum at 9.8, and it's above the 80th percentile, which is at 7.8. Some pictures, some photographs on page 12, starting with the location. So this is out Pandora near the perimeter. Aerial photograph on page 12. Once again, very large site, very large building. There was formerly a landfill on this property, which will be addressed by Mr. Smith in his evidence. We can see they've been adding fill to this site. Coming from the south, you can see the large pile of soil that's been added. Aerial photograph of the actual buildings on page 13. Exterior views on page 14 and 15. 15 showing from the south side of the site, looking north. Page 16, this is the status of title for the property. We can see in 2006 there was a $10 million mortgage. That's on page 17 at the top. Page 19 at the top, that was refinanced in 2011 for $15 million by the same numbered company. And there's a few caveats and postponement of rights in this document as well. Site plan on page 23, it's hard to make out, but it shows the layout of the buildings. Same with page 24. Page 25 was a Manitoba Building Code assessment with some areas on page 26. So this has to do with, there's two new tenants that are going to be sharing a space. This has to do with that. So they show suite 1, suite 2, suite 3, suite 4, which are shown on the next page, page 27. Suite 3 being in the bottom right hand corner, suite 2 being the biggest one in the middle, suite 1 on the left hand side, and suite 4 at the top. Some permits on page, starting on page 31. This is for Delta 9 Biotech. They're a new tenant, which are a C-can painting facility. Page 32, interior alteration for a warehouse. This is for DeFair Furniture. Interior alterations to tenant space. Construction of 1 new exterior loading ramp, overhead door, etc. Once again, the fair and quick transfer on the next permit on page 33. I'll note that the previous permit has a declared construction value of $325,000. Page 33, this permit has a declared construction value of $50,000. Once again, new fire exit corridor. This has to do with the 2 tenants sharing a space. Just to comply with the building code. Page 34, this permit has a declared construction value of $125,000. This was from 2017. Once again, it's DeFair Furniture installing some new exterior overhead doors. Page 35 is declared construction value of $250,000. This one's from 2014. Construction of lean-to roof over the existing roof. Page 36. This is the 2018 realty decision, which was confirmed. The value was $13,499,000. Some leasing ads on page 37 showing, not sure what the date is on this, but they're showing the rents at $625 for the manufacturing warehousing space and office space at $10. Plans on page 38 from that advertisement, and page 39. Some photographs of the interior on page 40. So very good wall height in some portions of this. Obviously, it's a warehouse with some office component. There are some outbuildings that were very specific to the old owners. I believe they made particle board at this location. Some more photographs of the interior on page 43, this time for the office space. Shows some of the attributes of the building on page 42, so ample parking spaces, 2 minutes to the perimeter, zoned M3, excellent surrounding amenities. They were seeking $10 for the office space at that time, and highway access and some upgraded lighting. Office space shown on page 43, pretty decent office space for an industrial building. And then the income and expense statements for the property on page 45. These are gross leases. I did not take the time to net them out. But we'll see the tenant roster. Oh, quickly on page 46, there are some capital costs noted in 17. The roof at 210, which we saw a permit for. The dock doors, which we also saw the permit for, and the lighting. Tenant roster on page 47. Showing the tenants that were currently in place as of the reference date. There was some vacancy, which I addressed with the increase in my revised workup. And based on that, we asked that the revised assessment be confirmed at $16,026,000. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Trevor?
Yes, and certainly I acknowledge that the city had a second look at it and appreciate that, but we do have questions, obviously, so we'll try and be efficient about this, but there's a lot to get through. I'll just start with the very last page there, the tenant roster.
Yeah.
So when I look at this, you can see that these are all gross leases, correct? And that the only thing not included is management in this case, and marketing or advertising. So everything else is lumped into the gross amount that they pay, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so their net amounts would be significantly lower.
Correct.
So when I look at the marketing materials from Pandora, let's keep in mind they're marketing materials in the real estate world. They're asking $6.25 per square foot semi-gross or modified gross, depending on whether you're in the warehouse or the manufacturing space, correct?
That's correct.
So they'd be significantly lower than that
That's correct.
on a net basis. And the office space, well, they're asking $10 a square foot. Did they achieve that in any?
Most likely they did not.
The page immediately before the Collier's information with the decision from the last cycle, the city's aware that we appealed this to the municipal board, of course,
That's correct.
and of the prior decisions in preceding assessment cycles at lower values.
Yeah, there's been some ongoing
Okay.
issues with this property.
All right, I'll move back to the front perhaps. Let's look at the issue of the land perhaps to start with. So the additional land that that has, or rather excess land that has been valued here, we have the city's used a land rate of $1.70 a square foot for the subject. And we're looking at almost 2.6 million square feet. When I look at the land comparables on page 5, numbers 2 through 5 are not, how do I put this, dramatically different in terms of size from the subject, as well as other other issues regarding location, development potential, servicing, etc.
That's correct.
So really the comparable number one would be the one that would be the most similar in terms of the subject property.
Comparable one has its own issues, being a $1 sale,
Fair enough. but they-
contaminated land, etc.
Yeah.
But yes, size-wise, it is the closest.
Okay, and that's at $1.25 a square foot.
Correct.
And that was, as you said, that was contaminated land as well.
Yes, that was the old stockyards.
Okay. The rent comparables, and I always hate to do this, so I know we all have limited time to look at everything. I do have some rebuttal on rent comparables. I don't know how you want to deal with that, Mr. Chair. I can discuss them and then pass the material out, or pass the material out.
We'll
and
pass the
discuss them.
material out.
Okay. I think this is, yeah. Thanks.
Is this from last time?
Pardon me?
Is it from last time?
It's just for this one property. I've got, oh, okay, did I give you too many? So we're relatively close in terms of, lease value, I think, but just as far as background, and again, I recognize individual assessor has limited time to evaluate all of these things, but I'll just look at the comps as we go through them on page number 3. 55 Dunlop Avenue in Inkster, this was a renewal of industrial rubber supply, so they were an existing tenant, motivated to stay. The second comparable at 1750 Inkster Street, if you look at the document that I passed out, this is a property that is owned by Artis REIT, national level real estate investment trust, and they state, as noted there on the front page, the property went through extensive redevelopment in 2015. They put in an entirely new loading court right off of Inkster with many new grade level doors, new awning, new paving, ramps, everything was redone with regard to the loading for the property to make it more utilizable for the tenants. They had a tenant that they signed up on the basis of doing this work. Obviously, they wouldn't sign up in November 2014 for 11 plus years, not knowing that this work was going to occur. So this was done as part of the deal with the tenant that was put in place in 2014. They also did extensive work on the office and the exterior of the building. Many things went into it. There was a lot of money spent to drive that rental rate. The 861 McLeod Avenue, the second physical page in that document, this is Woodland Supply. And again, I recognize the assessor doesn't have time to look into all of these things. This is a non-arm's length lease. It's owned and operated. The tenant is one and the same as the ownership. B&R Ventures Limited is the owner of the property. Woodland Supply is the tenant. The owners of both companies are identical, and so it's a non-arm's length transaction. The material is there for you to look at if you wish with regard to that background. Belabor that. 760 Pandora, this is actually on site, so the subject property itself, 770, once encompassed 760 as well. The entire parcel is DeFair Furniture, not Palliser, but DeFair Furniture. And they had built this when times were good for their industry. Subsequently, there was a significant downturn, and ultimately they leased it out to Delta 9 Biotech, who leased it in February of 2015, and they subsequently sold that portion of the overall property, 760 Pandora, to that Delta 9 Biotech company. So that is the background on that particular property. Significantly newer, higher ceiling heights, et cetera. Then 80 and 50 furniture. Again, I'm not gonna go through this in any detail, but these are, again, non-arm's length transactions. 80 and 50 Furniture Park are actually Palliser Furniture, owned and operated, and these are their own companies that are in location in those. If you go through the material here, and I don't need to belabor this, but if you go through it, it shows that they are non-arm's length tenancies in those facilities. So that's the background on that. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I just wanted to correct that information. Any questions? Or?
Any questions?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
Any questions from the panel?
I have no question.
Okay.
In looking at the workup for, on page number 6 and 7, so the rent was increased for the main building in the new workup to $2.50 a square foot, but there were no adjustments to the rents on the other portions of the building, correct?
That's correct.
And those would all be driven by model, based on age and size, et cetera, correct?
So on the original one on page 6, those were all model, save for the $1.94. That was an override.
Okay.
I didn't agree with it. I put it back to $2.50, but I increased the vacancy to more than offset that.
Right, so I recognize the vacancy aspect for sure. With regard, and this is a general question, I guess, with regard to the other buildings on site, would they be standard industrial buildings that would be easily tenanted?
Some of the buildings are definitely special use. I don't know what it would take to convert them into usable, leasable space, but I feel that the vacancy addresses that.
Okay. And then, sorry, I'm just noticing this now, and I make these oversights too. Looking at the shortfall on page number 7, it's at 360 rather than 375.
That is correct. I used a template from last cycle, which
Not a problem.
was, I did recalculate it with 375, so revised value with the excess land would be 15,936 rounded.
We all run into those given in the limited time, certainly. The cap rate in the previous cycle that was used for the subject property by the city was 9.75%. Would there be any material change in the investment market for a property of this special use nature and size?
It's a model-driven cap rate. It's above the 80th percentile. I feel it does capture the risk of this building.
Okay. Those are all of my questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions, Jeff?
I have that, thank you, sir.
I have no questions.
Okay, so how did you determine the amount of excess land?
I did not, it's roughly half. Looking at the aerial photograph, I don't think the buildings use half the space, so it's probably, I don't know why they chose that figure, but it's probably a percentage,
Okay.
probably 40% or
I'm
something.
just, 'cause I mean, a lot of times I've seen assessors take, 4-to-1 ratio, and then anything above that as excess.
I don't believe we did that because this is 12.2 to 1, so it would be significantly higher. I'm guessing that if you drew a line, perhaps where the building ends, that this would be the excess line,
Mm,
just a guess.
Okay. All right, yeah. So that would exclude that kind of vacant land at the back towards the
Correct.
tracks. Okay, and the valuation of $1.70 again, how did you,
It is a model rate, however, we can see at the top of page 4, the actual model rate was $269. Somebody applied a reduction to it based on some of the known issues, mostly it being former landfill site.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies it in my mind, so you can proceed, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. So this certainly is a complex property, so I'll try and be as concise as I can here. What I might do is give you a bit of background, as I've mentioned it already. If we flip to my page number 10 in the aerial. The subject site is outlined in red, obviously, encompassing all of the property, including any excess land attributed to it. If you look at the area on the bottom left-hand side, just outside of that red boundary, that is 760 Pandora. That formerly was part of this property as well. It was, as we said, there was a significant downturn in the economy and in the particular market segment that the Fair Furniture operates in, and they had a significant cutback in production and need for facilities. So this recently built facility, they vacated, and they were, over the long term, they were able to tenant it with a new firm, that being Delta 9 Biotech, obviously a special use nature, and Delta 9 ultimately bought that property from them. So that is the background of the site as a whole. That was formerly encompassed and is now taken out. I gather they may want to use a small portion for some type of painting facility. I'm unaware of that, and I don't think it's really has a value, in fact, of any real nature, so I haven't addressed that. So that's the site that we're looking at. Subject property was a production site, still is somewhat a production site for Fair Furniture, and so they did their furniture manufacturing and hardboard manufacturing on site. As noted, there are roughly 8 to 10 buildings on site. I've got 8 in my calculation here. Pardon me, with the majority of those being specific, buildings specific to the use of the owner of the property, that being furniture manufacturer. So some of them really have limited transferability in terms of utility to any other user or tenant, and we'll get into that quickly. So let's look at to start with, page number 3, I guess you see that we're looking at a 32% increase in value from the original $17.8 million, $4.3 million increase from the 2018 value, which we have appealed to the municipal board, and of course we await scheduling on that. Overall site is zoned M3. We're looking at 125 plus acres. Very, very large site with overall leasable area of just over 450,000 square feet. This is certainly one of the larger industrial facilities in the city, and we'll probably address that somewhere in the brief here. Looking at my page number 4, property was improved with a number of industrial use buildings between 73 and 2005, combined leasable area of 451 and 259 square feet. There's some pictures to show you, but I'll go through the text quickly here. There's a building identified as the Scrubber Building. This is an unheated steel frame structure, houses the mechanical and pollution control equipment. The Kiln Building is a steel frame structure that houses a kiln, would not be considered a rentable structure. unless in combination with the rest of the property for its existing dedicated use. The dryer building has an unheated section of approximately 12,000 square feet that is open to the exterior. It's simply a covered shelter essentially in that section, used for material storage, sawdust essentially. The biofilter building is an unheated Quonset building without services and is a specialized component of the particle board manufacturing process. Building would not generally be considered rentable, again, except for its current use as part of the whole property. Wood storage building is an unheated covered steel structure open to the exterior on 3 sides for a significant portion of that building. The staged development of the structures led to a variety of building sections, all with demising walls, resulting in a less than optimal layout from industrial production standpoint. Essentially, the majority of these buildings, aside from the main building, are extremely special use in nature. So assigning a rental rate based on model, and I understand the challenges with the city, but using the model to assign a rental rate to them overestimates what they would rent for on the marketplace based on the layout and utility of those buildings, and we'll look at that in the pictures of the property. So beginning on page number 5, the main building, built in 73, 346,000 square feet, 22-foot exterior wall height. This was the main manufacturing facility, and there's roughly a 10% office component, which is very minimal. Now, this building is the building which they have had various tenants in. Typically, what the owner has done, given the size of the building and the short-term tenancies that they've been able to attract on a gross rent basis, they have not demised the space off, and I think if you look at the city's material, you can see that that continues with 2 of the tenancies that are moving in there. They haven't put up demising walls, they haven't been required to put up fire separation as such, so you have wide open interior. Now, that may have changed marginally, but to my understanding, there hasn't been any significant demising. They merely rope off and or paint the section of the building that each tenant has access to. That obviously has an impact on rental rates as well. Now, we'll get to that when we deal with the value with regard to the leasability of it. The kiln building is shown at the bottom of page 5, 1,500 square feet. You can see what it is. It is a kiln. What is the rental value of that? Well, it's certainly going to be on the low side. The scrubber building, next to that, built in 91, 3,750 square feet, high wall height. Again, special use nature. This building's no longer utilized except for the boiler equipment, with the exception of the boiler, the equipment has been removed, and it would be in below average condition in my estimation. A little more utility than the prior building. The dryer building, it's not all the same. So I've got 4 different photos for you here. There's a high wall height on one section of 44 feet, as you can see, where they did drying of the materials. And then we have a lower section of 24 square feet, which is open to the elements. So if we look at an aerial of it, you can see roughly the layout. The original dryer building being that 12.8, and then the 12,000 square foot addition. So that 12,000 square feet is open to the air as shown from the photos. It's simply a cover for the materials. What's the value of that on a lease basis? Well, not sure who needs 44-foot wall height, etc. necessarily, and you'd have certainly some equipment to remove there, and the covered section is essentially that. It's an unheated section of building. Number 5, production building. This is their main production building. It's enclosed, a little more standard. 35-foot height, built in 89 and 93 in sections. There's a small mezzanine space. And this is where the main particle board production was done. It's got a huge amount of equipment in it that would need to be removed. DeFair is still operating, and they do still use this facility for their purpose, just not on the same level of production as they previously did. Number 6 is the biofilter building. Again, it's a Quonset hut, half walls of concrete with the covered tarp area on top. If you look at the flooring there, it's essentially a grating. You can see the perforations in it, which is an air filtration function, which is specific to them. Very little utility to others on the marketplace. Then we have the wood storage structure, and there is a section of this that is enclosed on 3 sides at the rear of it, or I guess the west side of it, and the other portion of it is open on 3 sides, and it's just simply, again, a covered material. And there's a wood storage structure, which we don't have a photo of, but again, metal frame and canvas, unheated, open to the exterior. So this is the property that we're looking at. So the rental rates that are applied by the model, while I understand the difficulty in arriving at fair rental rates, these are not properties, these are not structures that would lease typically, and the rent that should be applied to them is essentially nominal. You're not going to find comps for these out there, and they need to reflect what would be achieved on there. So we're looking at the property as a whole. What's the real rent on a net basis for the main site, the main building, and then a nominal rate for the rest of the site. Looking at the site on page number 10, and this comes into play with regard to the land value. So it's located in Transcona on Pandora out to Ravenhurst. It's at the very end of Pandora, essentially, just north of the rail tracks there. Pardon me. I'll go through this relatively quickly. The Transcona rail yards are located to the west of the property, not immediately west, but somewhat west, as well as if you look on the south side, you can see the rail located there. You have residential to the north and vacant land essentially on the east side of Ravenhurst with a few small industrial developments and or holdover residences. We're in agreement with regard to the excess land to be valued for the property. And with regard to servicing, if we look at my site on my page number 10, rather, if you go to the very edge of the driveway that heads north-south, to my knowledge, the servicing on the south side of Pandora essentially terminates at that point. So while there's sewer and water, etc., for the residences on the north side, it's not present on the south side of the property at this point in time. So any purchase of land would have a significant impact, or would be significantly impacted by the servicing costs that any purchaser would be required to put in place for that property. Now, more importantly, or at least as importantly, subject site is a former landfill site operated between 1937 and 72, as shown on the maps on the following pages. City of Winnipeg Water and Waste currently maintains a landfill monitoring program where they annually monitor these closed landfill sites, including the subject property. The monitoring program includes sample analysis, well installations, subsurface investigations. The projected costs for the subject property on an annual basis are $194,000 as incurred by the City of Winnipeg. By a report These are noted in a report titled Landfill Rehab and Cost Estimate Report for City of Winnipeg, completed by Golder Associates in December 2015, so relatively recent, and it's included in the addenda here. The following maps give you an indication of the landfill site and are taken from City of Winnipeg Water and Waste Department website. The environmental impacts and associated stigma of the former landfill would have a significant impact on the market value of any additional land for valuation. So, following pages, you can see the, pardon me, the landfill locations. So, the top of page 11 gives you the location of that specific landfill on the subject site. Page number 11 confirms, bottom of page 11 confirms where it is, as well as page 12. And these are all taken from, again, City of Winnipeg Water and Waste. So we have a former landfill site, clearly ongoing monitoring occurring. It is land that is impacted and contaminated, essentially. You can't have a former landfill and not have it contaminated, particularly if the city is concerned enough to have an ongoing monitoring program. That's got a significant impact with regard to the value of that land, without question. Property location shown on page 13, and then we can move on to page number 14. Now, functional obsolescence, these are special purpose buildings. They would not have a lot of transferability to others. They are there, so we will place some value on them, obviously, but that does need to be kept in mind with regard to the overall market value. Who's going to buy this? What are they going to use it for? Can you tenant it on the market, etc. And then obviously we have the impact of the former use of the land. Now, moving on to page 15, I'm not going to run through this in great detail. I'll leave this for you to read if you wish. What I've outlined here are specific factors to take into account in valuing large-scale industrial properties. These being size and function. Obviously, property of 346,000 square feet, that being the main building, is well beyond the size of the majority of properties in the city of Winnipeg, either on a single tenant basis or multi-tenant basis. We have the functional obsolescence, 8 buildings, the majority of them special use, very little transferability on the marketplace, certainly low possibility of tenanting those, and low utility to other users. And obviously limited rental potential on the marketplace, as we've outlined going through the brief up to now. We can move on from there to the valuation side of the property. So looking at my page number 17, looking at the 2017 income and expense, what I have done is go through and establish what your net rental rates are for the property in the main building, as none of the remainder of the site is leased. So these were the leases that were in place on the I&E as of the end of 2017. So their gross rates ranged from $7.81 a square foot down to $4.73 a square foot. When you make those net, we come to a high of $4.93 a square foot, which is kind of a one-off for 6,400 square feet, down to $2.12, $3.37, $3.62, $1.85. So for the majority of the building, that's leased, 107,000 out of 268,000 leased, we have $1.85 a square foot as the rental rate. For the occupied portion of the building, 268,032 square feet, we're using, the average rather, was $2.79 a square foot on a net basis. That leaves another up to 346,000, so we have another, 75,000 square feet that's vacant in that building in that period. So that is your average rental rate, net rental rate in that building. Again, we have a building that's not demised, we have office space where office space isn't needed in the Transcona Marketplace. They have leased it to some nonprofits that they like to support on a very nominal basis in the past. So that's essentially what we're looking at. They're not going to achieve rental rates of $6.25 net or anything of that nature. This is what they do achieve, and that is essentially what they'll achieve going forward. The main tenant being Quick Transfer in 107,000 square feet, $1.85 net per square foot. Once you deduct the operating expenses, 2017 operating expenses were $288. This is when there was, again, 70+ thousand square feet of vacancy, so lower operating expenses one would typically find. 2018 expenses were similar magnitude, $2.93 a square foot, so we're on track there. The resultant net rental rates, $1.85 to $4.93, with that average of $2.79 per square foot. Occupancy in the main building was 77.5%, so you're looking at over 22% vacancy at that time frame for the main building. So they have had this property for lease for many years. They've had significant difficulty drawing tenants out there. It's an oddball property in terms of its location, the size of the units. Well, it's wide open essentially. So using professional commercial realtors, they've had significant challenges in keeping anybody over the long term. Cabela's has come and gone. Quick Transfer is paying a very low rate, as you can see, so it's a challenged building. That's what they're achieving in place. The remainder of the site is special use. Now, I provided some lease comps for you for background purposes. We're not really going to find anything specifically comparable to this. Obviously, the main building is more standard, so we can have a look at that. We've got leases running from $2 a square foot in 2016 for 146,000 square feet at 1821 Wellington. This is the former Eaton's warehouse out by the airport. Relatively new lease in 2016, very large size. 1093 Sherwin, 2018 renewal at $3.15 a square foot for 175,000 square feet. Relatively high wall height at 19 feet. 1750 Inkster in 2014, 102,000 square feet at 312. Sargent 265 in 2015 for over 100,000 square feet. And then we had the former Cabela's lease, which is essentially overestimated at 285 net, where we come in at there. There's more that we can look at. Essentially, it's pointing to a low net rental rate for the subject property. They achieved 279 on that building on average when you look at the property as a whole. So we're looking at a range between $2 and $3.75 a square foot for these large leases. Again, none of them are 346,000 square feet in size, or certainly, what's our gross size? 451,000 square feet in size. There's very few properties of this size overall. Obviously, we're in the higher end of the range, roughly the fourth largest industrial manufacturing facility in Winnipeg. Not all of it used for manufacturing anymore necessarily, but that was the original construction. So larger than this, we have the Bueller Versatile Plant on Clarence at 700,000+ square feet, Standard Arrow on Barrie, and we then have Macdon on Moray at 600,000+ square feet. That's essentially it. There's 1180 Springfield, which is Kitchen Craft, which is 550,000 square feet roughly as well, which is also larger. So what do you use as a rental rate for a property such as this? They have somewhat standard but poorly located and in very low demand property, 22.5% vacancy. So we have used essentially a blend They're getting $2.80 a square foot roughly on that building. What's the value of the remainder of the property on a rental basis? Certainly very low. We've used an overall rate of $2.60 a square foot. This gives you a rent on the remaining structures of $1.94 per square foot once you do the math. And that gives us our potential annual rent of $1,173,273. Now, on the vacancy side, obviously significant vacancy. We did not ask for an increase to the vacancy. We've given you the market stats here, obviously in that 7 and 8% range for the most part. This is an enormous manufacturing facility with special use buildings. Is 5% on its own appropriate? Probably not, but there are two methods of doing this. You can use a standard vacancy allowance and address the increased vacancy risk in the selection of the cap rate, which is what we've done. Or you can ask for an increased vacancy rate and then disregard that portion of the cap rate selection in establishing the cap rate. So we have used the original standard of 5%, and the cap rate that we ask for is impacted by the vacancy as well. The expense allowance, we will not cover twice. Shortfall allowance for the subject property, again, typically expenses are significantly higher on properties such as this. They had a very marginally occupied property in 2017, and they had $2.88 a square foot for their main building at that time, with only a portion of it. With a significant portion of it vacant, obviously expenses would go up with occupancy. So we have used the city's $3.75 a square foot. In past times when it was operational, when I first started looking at it, the expenses were well beyond $3.50. They were in the $4 or $5 range, so it would typically be that on a full occupancy basis. We have deferred in our valuation to the $3.75 and not looked for an increase on that side. So this moves us on to cap rate. As noted on my page number 23, the property formerly had the city of Winnipeg, rather, in the 2018 cycle had a cap rate that they used of 9.75%. They've decreased this to 9% for the subject cycle. There's really been no change to this property in that intervening time frame. The market has not improved for it. All of the issues remain the same. The rents that they're achieving are essentially the same and or lower. So we have the background with regard to the Collier's information and C.B. Richard Ellis. We have our same comparables as presented on page 6. But let's look at the particular issues that need to be considered. We have all of these individual special purpose buildings. We have 8 buildings rather than 1, which would be certainly more typical. The layout, they're spread out over the site. We have, again, 450,000 square feet. This leads to high capital investment expenses, lots of roof and HVAC costs over time. Significantly oversized property for the market. Finding single replacement tenant would be an enormous challenge. Then you would have significant costs if one wanted to multi-tenant it. As you can see, they're not demising the property, not demising the main building as it is. So you have limited ability to convert to multi-tenancy. Higher vacancy risk with single tenant. We have the functional and physical obsolescence, which we've discussed. The layout is very poor. The buildings themselves are not very low utility for others. And then just based on the size and the structures that are there, you would encounter probably challenges on the financing side with relation to the real estate itself, in that you would typically have to pay greater interest than you would on a more standard property, which would of course drive your cap rate higher. Now, looking at the subject and taking all of this into account, we've applied a cap rate of 9.5% to the subject property. This is the same as we had applied, I believe, in the last cycle. And we really see no changes that would drive a lower cap rate for a property such as this. So utilizing a cap rate of 9.5%, if you flip to page 23, gives us our income value of $10,021,000 for the real estate now, and then we have to deal with the additional land. The chart on page 23 gives you the city of Winnipeg's 2020 and 2018 values. Obviously, there's been a change, an update from the city that has been presented today, but that is the background. With regard to the additional land, we're not in disagreement with regard to the size. We've accepted that. If you look at the aerial of the site, further back in the brief, I think it's somewhat instructive. Page number 10 gives you the site aerial with the main manufacturing plant over there and the somewhat vacant land to the other side. In arriving at market value, I would point you to a couple of things here. So we're looking for equity. We have a property that is impacted. The city knows it's impacted. It's a former landfill site. They have ongoing monitoring for the property. I'm not sure that you could, at the present time, develop the property in a normal fashion. In any case, we have servicing issues and that the land is not serviced to a standard level. Certainly, it's just to the border of it. And let's bring up the issue of equity. Let's look at page number 24 here. So this is the 99 Murray Park site in the city, property in the city. This is MacDon, another large industrial manufacturer. They have surplus land that the city has attributed to that property as well. You can see where the surplus land is.
Is that the Boeing plant?
That is the Boeing plant on that north side. You're correct, I'm sorry. I misspoke. In any case, it's in that same Murray Park area. You can see where the vacant land is there. We have significant sized property there. The city has attributed a land value indicator of $7,461 per acre for the additional land on that site. It has impacted, it is impacted as well. There's a typo in here where something was not removed with regard to 1180 Springfield Road, but essentially that is the value that the city has placed on very similar sized and impacted land for a very similar sized industrial facility. The material with regard to that, and we might as well look at this just to start with so that we're certain about it. The very last 3 pages of my brief gives you 99 Murray Park Road, the city's cover page for that property. Then we have, for the 2020 appeal, then we have the valuation on the second page with the additional land value at $429,000. And then the very last page, you can see that they have a land area of 57.5 acres, valued at 17 cents a square foot, with a per acre value of $7,461. Now, that land is very comparable to the subject. It's also impacted. The subject is a former landfill site, very similar in terms of size. There is no reason for this property to be assigned a different valuation model internally in the city's model than the subject than this 99 Murray Park. They should be treated on an equitable basis. Certainly, they're both peripheral properties. If anything, 99 Murray Park is probably more favorably located than the subject property. We also included the 1266 Duggold site, which has been talked about extensively. To that, I think the city's comp at 780 Marion is $1.25 a square foot for contaminated land. We're asking for equity in the treatment of this additional land, excess land, and so we've applied the same $7,461 per acre to the excess land of 59.35 acres, giving us a value of $449,000. And adding that to our income valuation gives us our final value of $10,470,000. So if you go back to my page number 23, our rental rate is based on their income, their present income, as well as the nominal ability to rent the remainder of the property. We're not asking for an increased vacancy for the property, despite the fact that it certainly will have that and does have that. The other components remain the same, and then on an investment basis, buying a property such as this, your risks are considerably higher. There's been no compression of those in the intervening time frame, so we have used a cap rate of 9.5%. The addenda materials include the income and expense, supportive decisions. We have the City of Winnipeg landfill status report from Boardroom and Associates that was referred to. We have the various contamination or maps with regard to the former landfill and the location of such and the monitoring of such. There's a lot of material there. Feel free to go through it if you wish. And then just the material with regard to the City of Winnipeg's treatment of other excess land and the valuation of such. And that is my presentation.
Okay, questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just quickly turning to your page 23, which is your income approach. My revised NOI is $1,038,000 roughly. Yours at $952 roughly. That's a difference of about $86,000. I think you'll agree the biggest difference in our approaches will be the cap rate and the excess land.
I would agree. I wouldn't discount the gap in the NOI, but certainly that's accurate. The larger portions are the others, but I would encompass the entire valuation.
And I think you mentioned that you can either address it via the vacancy or the cap. You'll agree that I did adjust the vacancy. We are using a lower cap, but I did adjust the vacancy.
You did, and my disagreement there would be that the net rental rates applied to the remainder of the property are well beyond what would be achieved.
Okay. Your page 24. I believe you are comparing assessments here.
Well,
And I feel Mr. Chairman said at the beginning of the hearing that comparisons of assessments shouldn't be considered evidence.
no, and I'll speak to that, and I'm certainly aware of that. Obviously, we're not strictly comparing assessments. What we're asking for is equity in the treatment of similar properties. So what we're showing is evidence of the treatment by the city of one particularly comparable property to the subject.
Okay.
And presenting that material.
But you'll agree that that 99 Murray Park Road is not in appeal today. We
No.
don't know the condition of that landfill. In fact, I looked into it briefly. The methane gas is significantly higher, 1,000 times, or 100 times higher than what they deem to be safe. There's no smoking signs on the former landfill site there. It's a lot more volatile. Trees are dying. Comparing assessments is tough.
I guess what I'm showing there is that we have two former landfill sites and the dramatic difference in treatment of the valuation of such. All the material with regard to the impact is shown in the Golder report in the addenda there. So I'm not aware of individual levels between the two of them, but the material is there to be reviewed.
So you didn't, I noticed in your landfill documents at the back, you didn't put any documents for the, I believe that's called the Barrie site. You have some documents for the CNR Dugald site, which is the subject, but you didn't put anything for the actual site that you're trying to use as a comparable.
The 99 Murray Park.
Yeah, which is called the Barrie Avenue dump
Barrie,
site.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid I didn't,
Okay.
I didn't think of putting them in.
And so the subject was mostly a dump used by CN, whereas the Barrie site was a municipal dump for the city of St. James. A lot more organic material, hence the higher methane rate.
There is a difference between them, however, again, they're both dump sites and it wasn't exclusively used by CN, but even with that, you have all the creosote and all of the other noxious uses that CN would use the site for, so the city's concerned enough to spend $200,000 a year on monitoring the property, so there's very clearly an impact to that site, whether it's, you know, of the same exact fumes that are coming off, I couldn't state, but it has an impact on the value of the site as well as obviously stigma to in the marketplace with what would be paid for such a property.
Okay, just quickly to touch on that $194,000 per year, that's from this chart?
Which one are we looking at?
There's no page number. It says additional estimated annual operating and capital costs of Winnipeg closed landfills.
So it's been a day or two since I read through the Golder report, but I'm sure you're probably correct.
Okay, but you're stating that that was 194 annual, when in fact 174,000 of that is capital costs, not the annual, and it's for repairs and upgrades, and I
So-
believe it's for fill, which they've already been adding.
So, no, and this is the challenge of these things, is we're sitting here today having to answer things on the spot. I did the research on this and went through it in detail, so in presenting the figure that I presented, it was with regard to an annual cost, so in you speaking today, I was not reading what you were referring to. If we want to take the time to do that, I can do that, but,
I don't think it's a big deal, I just wanted to point that out.
okay.
I think what I'm getting at is, you'll agree that all these former landfill sites are very different from one another. I think on the first property, there was one backing onto Narren, which is obviously fully developed commercial space now. Each of these landfills is completely different. They're all monitored, depending on the levels of what they're monitoring. Some have buildings, some don't, some have more vegetation than others. They're all completely different. I don't think that it's very prudent to start comparing the assessments of two different landfills.
Well, so to that nature, I won't state that all landfills are exactly the same, but the impact of them in the marketplace is beyond whether they can be developed or not. Obviously, if you've got methane escaping or monitoring going on, it can't be immediately developed, which has an impact on what the market value of that would be, because it would simply be holding of that land for the future. You would have any cleanup costs that would be involved, whether material is leached over into the groundwater, etc. There's a lot of moving parts there. I don't deny that, and in fact, that's part of it. We don't know what the ultimate costs might be here. So to have one property that was a former landfill of a similar size valued on a 17 cents a square foot and one at $1.70 doesn't seem prudent in my eyes either.
Okay. You will agree that the excess land values were maintained in 16 and 18 by the Board of Revision?
Yes, and those were all appealed.
Of course. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Brent, any questions?
I have no questions.
Jeff?
I have no questions, thank you.
Okay, on your page 25, with reference to the Google site, are you arguing that in the alternative we should use the valuation from the 1266 Google, the main indicative?
Well, and perhaps I should have included the larger chart that we did on one of the other properties here today. It's certainly of a significant size now. As we've spoken about, there are access issues there. It's also severed in half. So there are issues with regard to that, but I'm not aware of any contamination issues necessarily on that site. It does nominally have frontage on Dugald, which would be a greater value location where it is than where the subject is. On an alternative, yes, I suppose that would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there anything that arises from that?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. For that, does anybody want to do a summation on this, or?
I think we covered it all.
Yeah. Okay, and the last property is 5101 Google, and I believe you have a rec on this.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Address 5101 Dugald Road, roll number 0901031810. Current 2020 assessed value at $606,000. I'll just quickly, so this is an old house on a large parcel of land. We were valuing on an income approach with excess land. After discussions with Mr. Smith, we basically reduced it to land value with a nominal building value. There is, I believe there's some value attributed to the building, but we're going to recommend a revised value of $550,000.
And we're in agreement with that.
Okay, thank you very much. So that concludes today's hearing then. So thank you for your presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panel members.
Thank you.